We're beginning the Universe in Stone section of Manly P. Hall, an illustrated review of Occultism and Philosophy by Manly P. Hall. Upon the Kedu Plateau, some 25 miles from the stolid Dutch community of Jokjakarta, guarded by 4 sentinel volcanoes, stands the Borobudur, one of the largest and most impressive religious monuments of all times. A vast complex of lava rock, the blocks fitted together without cement, its surfaces resplendent with carvings. This huge reliquary bears witness to a long-vanished mood of Eastern artisans. Although certain aspects of its magnificence are evident to even the superficial observer, it is only after a painstaking examination that the full significance of the structure becomes apparent. Like most Buddhistic remains in Java, the Borobudur stood for many centuries in a desperate state of dilapidation. When Mohammedanism superseded Buddhism as the spiritual impulse of Java, the native mind, turning the new belief, neglected the shrines of the older doctrine. Falling into decay, the beauties of those religious edifices collapsed in a common ruin. The hand of the Vandal, however, has proved more unkind than the elements, as the rows of headless figures and chipped carvings testify. Fragments of Javanese art are to be found in museums and private collections all over the world, and the empty niches which once housed them only remain as mute accusers for the sacrilege. In 1896, His Majesty Chulalongkorn, King of Siam, was invited to help himself to any little bits which might please his fancy, and as Shaletema notes, he was considerate enough to be satisfied with only 8 cartloads when, funds permitting, he might have had the whole building. In this day, when the Vaisyas are building temples to their own conceits, they but imitate these Burmese who see little merit in preserving the shrines of olden gods. But even deserted temples have their day. Tourists and scholars from the 4 corners of the earth come in reverent pilgrimages to the ancient pile. Though their emotions may be undefined, all are profoundly impressed not only by the external mass, but to some measure by the sublimity of the doctrines which it embodies. These blocks were raised not by tools alone, but by the heroic visions of the builders, and even in this late age, when the stones themselves have been deeply scored by the vicissitudes of time, a little of the builder's vision still lingers about the fast dimming glory. In the afterglow, the intricate frieze work becomes alive. The dim outlines assume the likeness of a multitude of people gathered upon the side of a hill, their hands raised as though in prayer, and their eyes turned upward toward the lofty Dagoba, signified by the presence of the ashes of a perfect man. The physical dimensions of the Borobudur are impressive even in our day, of great architectural achievement. The shrine is built over the crest of a low hill, crowning it with a coronet of points and arches. The structure is roughly square, but without juttings on all 4 sides. The foundation is a little over 500 feet square, and the height approximately 150 feet. The edifice rises in 7 terraces. of which the lower 4 are square and the upper 3 circular. The carvings upon its walls, if placed end to end, would exceed the length 3 linear miles. Would exceed in length in 3 linear miles. The panels of sculpturings and reliefs are 6 feet in width and of such intricate workmanship that there is an average of 9 human figures to every square yard. A broad staircase ascends each face of the shrine, which roughly pyramidal, and these converge to a platform about 50 feet in diameter, upon which stands the central dagoba, or the reliquary proper. In keeping with its dignity, the reliquary is without ornamentation, save for some sacrilegious inscription of a late date, like the famous panel placed by Lepsius over the entrance to the Great Pyramid, calling attention amid the splendor of 1,000 ages to the merits of the King of Prussia. Okay, I'm going to pause reading and show you some of these photos. Give you an idea of what we're reading about. I've seen some of these things, and I wonder, like, how did they make these things? These aren't the exact ones I was thinking about, but never, to be honest, never even really seen them. Ah, the face of death. Ah, this book's huge. Ugh. On to what we were reading. Oh. Relative to the circumstances which dictated the erection of the Borobudur, no information is available. Authorities differ widely as to the date of its building, but James Ferguson, a leading authority on the subject of Buddhist monuments, places the time between the 6th and 8th century AD, possibly nearer the 6th. This gentleman's praises of the ancient temple are unstinted. He speaks of it as the highest development of Buddhistic art, an epitome of all its art and ritual, and the culmination of the architectural style which, originating in Bharhut 1,000 years before, has begun to decay in India at the time of the colonists. Bharhut 1,000 years before had begun to decay in India at the time of the colonists were erecting this masterpiece of the ages in the heart of Java. I guess I got it right. The work unquestionably required a vast expenditure of time and energy, for the carvings which run riot here were not chiseled in a single day, but by many carefully selected artists over an extended period. In fact, evidence has been discovered indicating that the building was erected during several periods, between which were intervals during which the labor was discontinued for reasons unknown. There are also grounds for the assertion that the shrine never was actually completed, the work being abandoned, as some conjecture, owing the disastrous activity of Merapi, the nearest of the neighboring volcanoes. During the period of excavation, a considerable quantity of volcanic ash was found clogging the passageways, and sifted in through the apertures in the greater stone bells. This lent credence to the volcanic theory, as well as certain sagging in the walls, quite possibly due to earthquakes. In the year 24 BC, the Emperor Asoka the Constantine of Buddhism, in his zeal to bring the great enlightenment to all parts of the earth, caused the ashes and sacred relics of Buddha, which were gathered. Where am I? Where am I? Oh my goodness. I can't even find where I was, my God. In the year 24 BC, the Emperor Asoka, the Constantine of Buddhism, in his zeal to bring the great enlightenment to all parts of the earth, caused the ashes and sacred relics of the Buddha, which were gathered after his cremation, to be exhumed from the 8 places of their interment. He then divided these relics into 84,000 parts, enclosing each part in a receptacle of appropriate value and dignity. These the Buddhist monks were to carry with them all over the earth, building temples and shrines to hold them, so that the whole world might be rendered fortunate by the presence of some part of the physical remains of the light of Asia. While it is not possible to connect the Borobudur with this program, it is reasonable to believe that the structure was designated to enshrine one of these 84,000 portions of the sacred ashes. When the Dagobah was opened, however, its 2 compartments were found innocent of such contents. Of the great wonders of the world that remain to us, the Borobudur will probably be the first to disappear. All things reach the end of their span and vanish of themselves in spite of every effort of their preservation. In recent years, a world repentant for its neglect has tried to make amends, but it's too late, and another 100 years will find the carvings of the Borobudur, if not obliterated, at least so dim as to be but shadows of their former grandeur. During the early periods of excavation, the workmen failed to clear the drainage channels, which the original builders had wisely provided for, and as a result, the tropical storms in a country where rain is an hourly occurrence played havoc with the masonry. The water seeped into the cracks unprotected by cement, weakening and washing away the very foundations upon which the building stands. The lava rock, also soft and powdery with age, is easily eroded by the elements. Stone faces that 25 years ago were rich in inspiration are today but flat protuberances, so that while future generations may gaze upon the outlines of the building, the wealth of its detail must pass away with our lifetime. Viewing the Borobudur as a whole, one is unfailingly impressed with the civilization that the shape of the building and the arrangement of its parts have a definite symbolic significance. It is not too much to affirm that this shrine is a complete embodiment, as one writer has said, of the Mahayana branch of Buddhism. A careful inspection demonstrates the logic of this statement, and even more, the Borobudur is a miniature of the world, devised by cunning craftsmen who dared to carve the finite into the likeness of the infinite. The Borobudur is the universe in stone. That the Borobudur should be an embodiment of metaphysical speculations need not to be considered either improbable or fantastic, as ample precedent is found among the religious structures of the Mahayana sect. The Kaityas, the Kaityas, or funeral monuments of the Tibetans, with few exceptions, depicted by their Depicted by their form, the divinations of the world and the 5 elements into which the body is resolved by the phenomenon of death. The universe of the Buddhists is derived into 3 regions or qualities, each merging into the other, all finally to mingle their essence into the nirvanic state. The Borobudur so accommodates itself to such classifications as to convict its builders of such premeditation. The building proper consists of 3 parts, which may be increased to 4 if the broad platform surrounding the base be considered as a separate element. From this platform, the structure rises in 4 squares and 3 circular terraces. The bell-light reliquary stands in the midst of the latter. In Greek metaphysics, the 7 terraces or platforms might well represent the spheres of the 7 sacred planets. This number is increased to the ever-significant 9 by adding the square platform below, which would correspond to the earth, and the Dagobah above, which by its shape and internal division might well typify the departments of the Empyrean or heaven. In the Buddhist adaptation of this old idea, which has come down from the first Aryan traditions, the square platform constituted the region of desire, Kamathatu, itself divided into 2 major parts, of which the lower is the physical earth and the higher Devaloka, the abode of the Devas, or terrestrial gods. Devas. The abode of the Devas, or terrestrial gods. The circular platforms are the region of forms, Rapadhatu, sometimes referred to as the heaven of Brahma, and consisting of 16 worlds divided into regions called spheres of contemplation. The tower at the top would then become the region of formlessness, Arapadhatu, which is the nearest to nirvana. In the terminology of the Western philosophers, these worlds from above downward and are the supreme sphere. Oh my God. In the terminology of the Western philosophers, these worlds from above downward and are the supreme sphere, the superior sphere, and the inferior sphere of Plato and Pythagoras. Also, the heaven, earth, and hell of the Christian theologians. They represent also the 3 major divisions of man, the spiritual or essential part, the intellectual or rational part, and the physical or irrational part. In nearly all the cult traditions, the same symbol is susceptible of a number of interpretations according to the aspect of the doctrine under consideration. There can be little doubt, however, that the 3 higher and circular platforms, with their meditating dhayanas, represent the trinity or threefold causal aspects of both the universe and man, while the 4 square platforms below symbolize the foretold phenomenal aspects of the universe and man. It is interesting to note at this point that the life-size sculptures figured seated in the niches which ornament the square platforms are all looking outward, possibly intimidating by their position that in the lower world, that of form, the vision of man is objectified and his attention turned to the contemplation of externals. The 3 circles of Buddhas on the upper platform signify by their position the more exalted state in which they exist. They are all seated with their backs to the outer world, facing the dome-shaped structure, which is the symbolic axis of this monument. From the bells, each of which symbolizes parts of a lotus, the 72 lords of light, or witnesses, contemplate in raptures the ever-existing reality which stands in their midst. A most extraordinary circumstance in the connection with the Borobudur is the fact that for some unknown reason the image discovered within the central Mendot was never finished, remaining but the shadows of a form, half visible in the obliterated rock. Some believe this to have been accidental, but those better acquainted with the subtleties of Oriental occultism believe that they have discovered the reason. The figure in the central tower was too high, an aspect of universal reality, to be imagined in the usual way. Three answers to the riddle have been advanced. According to the first, the unfinished statue represents the recondite and inscrutable nature of truth. According to the second, it represents the Hiriti, the sixth Buddha, who has not yet come and whose form was therefore unapprehensible to men. And according to the third, Nirvana itself is implied for the figure. It is not separating itself from the stone, but rather fading into universal reality and losing thereby all physical definition in its outward state. Before I continue, I'll show you the pictures. Very old pictures. The four staircases leading upward through the terraces upon which are depicted the mysteries of incarnation, the whole recapitulation of the holy life, like the four Vedas which issued from the 4 months of Brahma, or the four principal yogas, signify the paths by which moksha or perfection may be attained. From the four corners of the illusional state ruled over the demons' kings, men in quest of liberation and perfection converge toward the ever-sacred mountain, the eternal Miru, of which Borobudur is a type. Like the pyramidal ladders of the Babylonians or the mystic mazes of the American Aborigines, this structure is a symbolic antechamber to eternity. Its steps lead upward from earth to heaven, and those who sense the inner import of the shrine, as they slowly mount amidst the meditating immortals, find themselves actually transported into the spheres typified by the various departments of the buildings. Only certain initiates are fully aware of the universal mysteries comprehended in the symbolism of the Dhyana Buddhas. Those moods of meditation which are the true elements of the universal chemistry, all worlds, being, and conditions are suspended in and composed of the meditations of the seven immortals, of which 5 are revealed and 2 concealed. Life itself is but a mode of meditation. In their niches upon the walls of Borobudur, the Dhyanas reveal by their mudras that they are aspects of that one eternal principle which, descending out of its own infiniteness, becomes universal life. The Dhyanas who gaze outward from the eastern walls have their hands in the posture of witnessing, a sort of affirmation of reality. Those facing the west are in the posture of meditation. Those in the south signify by their posture that they are bestowing great good, while those in the north are blessing with fearlessness. Above these 4 groups, called the Buddhas of the angels, are the 3 circles of meditating figures in the bells, the latter called the Buddhas of the zenith, and each depicted as turning the wheel of the law or giving the great instruction. In the Dokazang, it is written that when the last of the great Buddhas shall come, the universe itself will not be large enough to serve as a shrine for all his relics. The Borobudur then intimate, in, then imitates. How can I not read that? The Borobudur then imitates the universal diffusion of Buddhist wisdom. The sacred relics of the Buddha, exoterically considered, are the few bits of bone and ash remaining after the sacred flame has consumed the avatar. Of such classification is the supposed sacred tooth of Kandy, well nigh large enough for a mastodon. Exoterically, the relics are practically identical with the jewels of Buddha, namely the work of the Master, the order which he founded, and the example of his life. If preserved with proper veneration within the heart and applied with discrimination and industry, these relics incline the devout into the way of truth. According to the sacred writings, with the passing of the Enlightened One, the whole world wept, for by the transcendency of his wisdom, Buddha was one with the soul, urge of all creatures. He was in truth the substance of the universal desire, the embodiment of the ageless quest for peace and wisdom. At night with the Borobudur, writes J.F. Sheltema, is a night of purification. My goodness. Lost my place. He was in truth the substance of the universal desire, the embodiment of the ageless quest for peace and wisdom. A night with Borobudur, writes J.F. Sheltema, is a night of purification when Amitabha offers the lotus of the good law and the gift is accepted, when the wonderful edifice rising to the star-spangled sky unfolds terrace after terrace, a gallery after gallery, between the domed and pinnacle walls, and his flower of ecstatic meditation spreads its petals, opens its heart of beauty to the fructifying touch of heaven. When tranquil love descends in waves of contentment, unspeakable satisfaction, the Dagobah loses its sharp, bold outline and melts into boundless space, a vision of fading existence and consummation of wisdom. A mysterious voice, proceeding from the shrine, urges to search out the secret it hides. The summons cannot be resisted, and going up, trusting to the murky night, mounting the steps to the first gate, as in a somnambulistic trance, the seeker of enlightenment discerns the path guided by his quickened perception, when the voice dies of its own sweetness, the fragrant stillness appeasing the mind and extending promise of piety for passion and fleshly desire, the garment of sin left behind. Surely it was the supreme wisdom forgiving all things because it understands, which inspired a human intellect to devise, directed human hands to achieve, in the delineation of mercies, such powerful architectural unity, sustained by such sublimity, beauteous ornament. Pondering upon this supreme wisdom and seeking to analyze the nature of that sense of elevation which is bestowed by the building, the occultist goes out into the afterglow to lose himself for a little while in the majesty of the ancient ruin. As he stands gazing up at the symphony of points and parapets, he feels himself caught up in the swirl of a mighty mood. By the light of the soul, the old lava rocks find a new splendor, and all imperfections melt away. lost in the glory of the whole. The full significance of the great architectural complex dawns upon the understanding, but eludes the dimensional limitations of the mind. The building glows throughout, vibrant with the pulse of a vast motive. The terraces and platforms extend themselves until the whole universe is filled and nothing remains but a mountain of light, its base supported by woven thunderbolts, while the great Dagobah upon its summit lifts its slender point beyond the stars. In the several departments of this vision are the radiant forms of the illumined, all seated in the invariable posture, all gazing with the same measure of repose toward the pillar of light, hovering like the Shekinah's glory about the reliquary. Suddenly it seems that the very heavens open, and from the depths of space issues forth a flaming face of Adi Buddha. The Eternal One rises from his lotus throne, from the flower whose petals are all the worlds, and, descending like a blazing sun, gathers his radiance about him and seats himself within the upper chamber of the Dagobah. Light supernatural flashes from the hallowed place. The seven worlds were blinded by the radiance, so that the saints dared not gaze upon it, but bowed their shaven heads to the light which extended even beyond the bounds of space. Then from the midst of the sanctuary, from the blazing heart of the universal life, there shot forth seven flames. These were swirled about until each assumed the appearance of the sun. Their glory was little less than that of the sovereign flame, and the seven sons of light assumed the seven sacred postures and propitiated their cause. And the meditating sages knew by an inner realization what had occurred, but they dared not to gaze upon the mystery, for the glory of the world was too great for even the enlightened. And the seven sons called unto the deep, bidding their shadows come forth. And they lighted the shadows with their own light, and the faces of the shadows glowed, each with a different color, and the shadows became alive and bowed before the seven sons and meditated upon the mystery. Thus were fashioned the Dahayanas, the Buddhas of the boundless, and they faced the cause, and they knew the self, because they received the light of the cause, and were filled with the reality of the self. Such is the mystery that took place upon the three circular terraces of the aged house. Now from the four circular worlds below there ascended a prayer, and it arose from the creatures of the darkness, whose faces could not reflect the celestial luminance. The illusion cried out to the reality, saying, "Impart yourself to us, that we too may be real." And the seven Dahayanas that sat in meditation upon the rings of truth heard all, and each one became, as it were, two, for there issued out of him a mist-like semblance of himself, and it arose and descended, but the glorious part remained in contemplation of the eternal light, and the shadows, or the ghosts of the Dahayanas, were the super-celestial bodhisattvas, and they descended to the first square terrace, and they lighted the terrace with their glory, and the substance of the terrace rejoiced and was full of light. And the super-celestial bodhisattvas became also divided, and the lesser shadows which departed out of them descended on the whole next step to rejoice the substance of the world and enlighten the creatures that dwell therein. And these were the bodhisattvas of the next order, the celestial redeemers, and they in turn called to the deep which was below them the worlds as yet unenlightened by their presence, and out of these lower worlds there arose seven holy men filled with the realization of and prepared to receive the Dharma. And the shadows of the celestial bodhisattvas entered into the seven holy men, and these men became Buddhas, and they went forth into the lowest worlds to bring the good law to every being that dwelt in the wide presence of the world. And the terrestrial Buddhas and the Arhats sat upon the lower steps of the mystery, and creation in its every part adorned the light and the seven sons of light who dwelled together in the first mystery. And the light descended upon the steps which are on the four faces of existence, and like four streams uprising from an inexhaustible fountain, diffused itself throughout all time and space. The moon arose from behind the great pile of half-ruined masonry. The cool of the Java night was strangely peaceful after the fierce heat of the day. The vision was gone. Only the shadow remains, but it is a shadow which, after all these ages, bears certain witness to the laws of life. I'm not sure if this is a new section or if it kept going. I think it keeps going. The Caliph has dreamed. 3 times had the same strange vision disturbing his slumbers. So sorely troubled was the son of the prophet that he dispatched riders immediately to bring to the palace a certain holy dervish deeply versed in the mysteries of the stars and all other magic arts, that his dream might be interpreted. Now the astrologer was a most venerable man who lived in a cave on the side of a wind-borne cliff, and beholding the horsemen alight before his retreat, he came forth to wish them peace, and make inquiry as to their mission. The messengers bowed humbly before the aged hermit, saying, "O most holy man, my illustrious master, the prince of this country, has been sorely afflicted by phantom shapes that have beset his sleep, and he bids me bring you to him that you may set his soul at rest and reveal the meaning of his haunting vision." And so it happened that the dervish gathered up the instruments of his art and rode in a state into the city, finally to stand before the divan or of the Caliph. Then spake the princes, "O thou so greatly beloved of Allah that he has bestowed upon thee all knowledge of that which is past or is yet to come. Interpret for me my dream. Thrice have I seen a bright star shining. From the blue haze of the desert night it rose serenely to the zenith, and from this high point its pulsing light illumined the world below. Then came a cloud, a black mysterious mass, in the midst of which glowed a flaming sword. Relentlessly the cloud obscured the light of the star, and a lurid red shadow spread over the face of the night. What a strange disaster doth this evil omen portend, for I perceive it to be a most malicious one. The astrologer spread forth his charts covered with strange figures and several colored pigments. He opened great books and read them gravely, and at last, after weighty calculations, he returned his gaze to the face of the prince. At length he spoke, "O leader of the faithful, thou art indeed destined to an unhappy end, for I find it written by the sages of old that he who 3 times sees that which thou hast seen shall perish miserably at the hands of one whom he doth honor greatly and trusts implicitly. Furthermore, by most profound calculation, I perceive that this shall occur when next the moon is full. O miserable prince, thou hast but 20 days to live." The Caliph bowed his head. his features sorely troubled, and even the flashing jewels in his turban dimmed by the evil tidings. As the dervish was about to depart, the prince called after him, "Stop! You are the wisest of all men. Tell me how I may avert this fate. Can you suggest nothing by which I may turn the tide of destiny and escape so tragic a circumstance?" The astrologer shook his head. "No more will the stars change in their courses than will the waters of the sea cease their ebb and flow. It is Kismet." Now the Caliph was a man of great wealth and strong temper, and he swore by Allah that he would not die, but would cheat even destiny of its victim. He further swore that on the day after the full of the moon he would be alive to quarter the astrologer, who had thus dared to bring such a palpitation to his royal heart. "O hateful dervish, if I die, thou art an honest man, but if I live, thou art in every sense a knave." Then he summoned his builders and spake thus to the chief architect: "Today, even this very hour, thou shalt take 1,000 men, and they shall build me a refuge wherein even the rays of the stars cannot enter. Thou shalt build it as a great cube of stone, and the walls shall be 20 feet thick, and they shall be lined upon the inside with lead, and the refuge shall be great enough so that the air within the cube shall suffice for 24 hours. There shall be but one door, and when I have entered it in, it shall be sealed after me with stone to the thickness of the wall, so that neither the powers of heaven nor hell can follow me. And no one shall be with me in this room but this holy dervish, who shall bring in his instruments and a water clock, so that I shall know when the fatal moment has passed. And outside the cube shall be another man with a similar water clock, and when all danger is past, thou shalt unblock the entrance, and I will come forth and laugh at the stars and all their auguries of the heavens." The chief architect bowed humbly, answering, "Master, it shall be done," and left with great haste to execute his master's bidding. Upon the day appointed there stood within the ample courtyard of the palace, under the very minarets of the mosque, the cubal retreat, complete in every part. Slaves were entering and coming forth again, bearing instruments. The Caliph himself had thoroughly inspected every workmanship, that there were no cracks between the sheets of lead or openings in the mortar of the wall. The mathematicians had computed every moment of the heavenly bodies, and, convinced that he was secure in every possible way, the Caliph and the astrologer entered the cube. Swaying slowly, the great door closed behind them. Soon were heard the sounds of the masons, as they laid their blocks of stone behind the portal. These gradually grew fainter, and soon there was only the silence, broken by the steady drip of a water clock. "Well then, holy dervish," the Caliph said, "are we not well isolated from astral influences? Even Luna's baleful influence so scarcely reach us here. How long before the fullness of the moon shall be complete?" The astrologer examined his charts. "In 1 hour, master. When yonder red ring is above the water, the crisis comes." Clenching the hilt of his garden scimitar, the Caliph watched the water level fall in the clepsydra. The dervish stood near, his eyes closed, and leaning on his forked staff. As the minutes passed, the tension became almost unbearable. The prince moistened his dry lips with his tongue. His eyes ached with the intensity of his stare. Not only his own life, but the whole heavenly order hung in the balance. Slowly the water fell. Now, whispered the Caliph. The dervish leaned forward. The moon is at this moment full. Before the blocking up entrance to the cube stood a table. On it set a set of instruments similar to those within the cube. The keeper of the royal observatory, a round person, rose clumsily to his feet and raised his hand. It is 2 hours since the moon was full, and according to our master's orders, it is now time we should clear away the entrance that he may come forth and confound the universe with his living presence. The workmen hurried forward. Stone and mortar were quickly cleared away, and 3 eunuchs with concerted strength swung open the great leaden door and bowed low in anticipation of the Caliph's appearance. But no sound came from within the cube. The Grand Vizier pompously pushed by the slaves that he might be the first to congratulate the prince. He stopped in amazement. At one side of the cubicle compartment stood the dervish, his eyes closed, still leaning on his staff. On the floor was a dagger in his back. Lay the Caliph amidst the wreckage of the water clock. Turning to the meditating dervish, the Grand Vizier exclaimed, "What has occurred? What has befallen our master?" The holy man replied, "He died at the full of the moon, as the stars decreed." The Grand Vizier drew his sword. "Then, wretched one," he cried, "thou hast killed him." "Thou canst not touch me," replied the dervish, "for the prince himself decreed that if he lived, I died, and if he died, I had prophesied correctly, and in me there was no fault." Ugh. And that's it for that chapter.